As a sewing machine repair tech, tension problems are the #1 symptom my clients complain about, and almost every issue comes down to a few common mistakes that people make. In this video, I'm going to explain how tension actually works and how to read your stitches like a diagnostic tool so that you can master your tension troubles for good. I'm Lisa. I'm a quilter and sewist turned sewing machine repair entrepreneur, and I'm here fixing machines out of my basement workshop in Metro Detroit. I'm sharing videos from my workbench here to help you master your sewing machine so you have less sewing machine drama and can do some more actual sewing. So before we touch anything, we need to actually understand what the tension is doing, because this is going to help everything else make a little bit more sense. So your sewing machine creates what's called a lock stitch, and every stitch is actually forming a tiny knot. So the top thread and the bottom thread, they meet and they lock together. And when your tension's balanced, that knot forms right in the middle between your two layers of fabric, and you can't actually see it. So your stitches look evenly on both sides, or at least that's the goal. So now picture a tug of war between those two strings. So the top thread is pulling from one side and the bottom thread is pulling from the other. And when they're evenly matched, that knot stays in the middle. But if one side is pulling harder than the other, then that knot can get dragged towards whichever side is winning. So when we're looking at our project and we see the top thread like looping on the bottom of the fabric, that means the top thread is losing. It's either too loose or that bobbin thread is pulling too hard. And when you see the bobbin thread coming up to the top, that's the inverse, right? So the opposite's happening. The top tension's too tight, or that bobbin could be too loose. So this is why just like randomly turning the tension dials rarely works. Like we actually need to know which direction things are going off before we start adjusting. Okay, so what is actually controlling the tension of the two threads in your machine? So your upper thread, as you thread it, it's going to pass through these two tension discs, and the tension discs are squeezing the thread as it passes through it. And the dial on your machine or the computer setting, that is adjusting the actual pressure that is being pressed onto the thread as it's passing through. And then for your bobbin thread, there's actually a spring in the bobbin case. And this spring, which is controlled by a small adjustment screw, is what's controlling the resistance on your bobbin thread. So these are very precise, calibrated adjustments in order to get that thread to meet exactly in the middle as it should. Okay, so before we start touching the tension, let's have a brief chat about our thread, because yes, your thread has a direct impact on how your tension reads. And if your thread's the problem, you can, spin that dial all day, but you're not gonna get very far. So let's chat about thread weight, because this is what trips people up the most. So your thread weight is usually printed right on the spool. You'll see something like 50-2, which means it's a 50 weight thread that is 2-ply. The -2 is the ply of the thread. But the higher the number, the finer the thread. So 50 weight thread is like your everyday all-purpose thread. 40 weight is a little bit thicker. And then 60 to 100 weight is a really fine thread that's usually used for like detailed piecing or very delicate work. So here's why this matters for your tension. So the weight of your thread affects how much resistance the tension discs can apply to it. So a finer thread moves more easily, whereas a thicker thread creates more drag. So if, for instance, you have different weight threads on the top and the bottom, the two sides of that tug of war are not evenly matched, and your stitch is gonna show no matter what number your dial's on. So this is a common issue. A lot of people might just wind their bobbin with like whatever thread they have nearby, or use a preloaded one, and then have a different brand or a different weight thread on top. And then they spend an hour, troubleshooting their tension really unnecessarily. So simple rule here is to try to match the weight of your thread on both the top and the bottom. Ideally the same brand as well, because there are going to be some variances between the different brands. I also just want to note that using contrasting colors in the top and the bottom is really helpful when you're troubleshooting your tension, because you'll be able to see where each thread is ending up in the stitch. and that makes it a lot easier to diagnose what's off. The last thing on thread quality. So consistent low lint thread gives you consistent tension results. But if you're using old thread that maybe has been exposed to sunlight, or the bargain bin thread, like if it snaps pretty easily when you tug it, all of that is introducing variables that are going to impact the tension. I personally use the Gutermann 50 weight thread in my shop. It's very widely available. Aurifil 50 weight is also very widely recommended as well. I think it really is going to be worth it in the result of the finished project and saving a lot of frustration while you sew. The bottom line, if the thread is fighting your machine, your tension dial isn't going to be able to save you. So get the thread right first, and then we can talk about adjusting. Now, in this video, I'm going to go over a basic upper tension adjustment. This is the type of adjustment you make for whatever your specific project you're working on is. Now, this does assume you're starting with your upper and lower thread already reasonably in balance. Now, if your tension is currently way off, maybe you've already made some adjustments and it just seems to be getting worse and not better, then that's when we typically want to do a full tension reset and calibration. So I'm not going to go over that in this video, but I am going to go over it in detail in the very next video that I post to this channel. And if it's already published, it will be linked right here. By the way, everything I'm covering today, as well as that tension reset process, is documented in the Tension Rescue Toolkit PDF. That's linked in the description, so go ahead and grab it if you haven't already. All right, so now it's time to sew a line of stitches and learn to read them so that we can determine what adjustment we need to make. So you're gonna need some scrap of the material that you're working with, and this is important. We want 2 layers. The stitch really needs 2 layers of material for the stitch to properly form. If you're doing a test sew with only 1 layer, you're never gonna get an accurate read on your tension. So let's start with our tension set to either the auto or middle setting. Sometimes there's like a red dot or some sort of indication of the middle of the tension dial. And if it's numbered, it's typically at about a 4. By the way, the numbers on a machine are not universal whatsoever. So there really is no answer to like, what number should I have it set to for leather or for chiffon? Like, that's just not how it works. So the goal is not a specific number. The goal is getting to a balanced stitch and knowing how to use the tension dials to get to that balanced stitch. So we're going to set our machine to a zigzag stitch. Width should be around a 4, 4.5 is fine as well. And length, I'll set to 2.5. And if you can, do 2 different contrasting thread colors, one on top and one in the bottom. Go ahead and do that. Of course, only do this if they're actually the same weight, ideally the same brand, but having those contrasting colors is going to make reading the stitch a little bit easier to diagnose. So now go ahead and sew a few inches and take a look at both sides of the fabric. This is why we start with the zigzag. So the needle, as it moves from side to side, the thread has to travel farther in each direction, and that distance adds stress to the stitch. So tension issues that might be able to hide a little bit easier on a straight stitch are going to show up immediately on a zigzag. You'll see it pulling to like one side, the width starts to get a little uneven, the shape will distort. It's just a lot clearer to test with a zigzag than a straight stitch alone. So what are we looking at here? So if your stitch looks even on both sides, so you're only seeing your top thread on the top and the bobbin thread is only pulling through to the bottom, that is a balanced stitch. That's our goal. That's what we're going for. If you're already there, lucky you, you're already at the finish line. Now, it is possible, and this is a common misconception, so I want to make sure it's clear. So it's possible that you will see like tiny little dots on the points of your zigzag of like the bobbin thread come to the top or the top to the bottom. Just little specks at the tips. A little bit peeking through is in the range of normal. Now, if the bottom of your fabric looks like this, where we have like these wild loops, a big nesting mess, no stitches being formed, this is almost always a threading issue. So what's happening here is that the thread is not actually seated between the upper tension discs. So important rule here is we always thread the machine with the presser foot up. When the presser foot is up, those discs are open and the thread can actually fall through. But if you're threading with the machine with the presser foot down, the thread is just never gonna be able to get between those tension discs. So rethread the entire machine from scratch, make sure you have your presser foot up, and then thread everything again before you touch anything else. If you can see the top thread on the bottom of your fabric, that means the top thread is losing that tug of war. It is too loose and your upper tension needs to go up. So we're gonna turn that to a higher number on the dial. Now, if you can see the bobbin thread coming up to your fabric, the opposite is happening. This means your top tension is too tight and we're going to have to turn that upper tension dial down to a lower number. Now, when we make an adjustment, we are making a small incremental change. If I'm starting at a 4, I might go to like 4 1/4. I'm definitely not jumping to a 5, not even to like 4 1/2. Like we're going very small increments here. And between each incremental change, we're gonna sew a line of stitches and read our results again and adjust from there. So be patient here because it may take a few lines of stitches, 5 or 6, maybe more, to get to that balanced stitch. Once we get there though, once your zigzag stitch looks balanced, we're gonna stop. We're not gonna declare victory just yet though. We're gonna switch back over to a straight stitch and do one more test sew and look at both sides again. And if our straight stitch looks balanced after balancing the zigzag, then we're good. That is our green light. If however, the zigzag looked right, but for some reason our straight stitch is still off, that's telling us maybe a threading issue or a needle issue, not actually the tension. So go back, rethread, try a fresh needle if you need to. But if your straight stitch looks good, that is our green light. You have a balanced stitch and you are ready to keep sewing. So now that we know how to read our stitches and balance our tension, let's talk through some common scenarios. So for heavy or layered fabrics, so think, denim or canvas, or maybe you're working on a very yummy quilt sandwich, these thicker materials create more drag on the lower thread as it's feeding through. So when that happens, the stitch is likely to start pulling towards the bottom. So a slight increase from whatever your baseline is, we're talking like 1 increment or maybe 2, is usually all it takes to bring into balance. So go ahead and sew a line of stitches and adjust as needed, just the same process as before. All right, so for lightweight or delicate fabrics like silk or chiffon, these are thin enough that even a slightly tight upper tension is gonna like pucker or start pulling on your fabric. So we're gonna drop our upper tension slightly from our baseline. Again, just one small increment at a time. Take your time to get to the right balance stitches. These fabrics are very unforgiving. So make sure you're testing on scrap before you're working on your actual project. Okay, and then for stretch fabrics, now this is important for stretch. The first thing we want to do is check our needle, not our tension. A sharp point needle in the machine is going to give you skip stitches and stitch problems that look like a tension problem, but aren't. So you really need a ballpoint or a stretch needle if you're working with stretch fabrics. So swap the needle first, and then if the stitch still needs some fine tuning, then follow the same process as before to adjust your upper tension. Now, if you've tried adjusting the upper dial and you just can't get the stitch to get into balance, that may be a signal that your bobbin and your upper tension are not calibrated, and you're probably gonna wanna go ahead with that full tension reset process. So I will be covering that in next week's video. And it's also already documented. The whole step-by-step process is in the free download that I mentioned before, which is linked in this video's description. So thank you for joining me today. And please tell me in the comments, what project are you currently working on? Myself, I have a quilt top that I started well over a year ago that I am finally going to get sandwiched up and try to get quilted on my own home domestic sewing machine. So I will keep you updated with how that goes. But as always, keep on sewing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.